What's going on, everybody? Today we are going to go over what to do on every single portal, just like a quick tip here and there for all 30 portals. So hopefully this should help you all because there are so many of them, and I actually don't want to go too in depth into each and every one of them, and I'll tell you why. Because there are over 30 maps, right? And when there are over 30, you can't memorize strategies for all 30 things. I mean, you could, but it would just be very time consuming, and it's better just to play good regular TFT and then apply just like a little change here and there on each of the maps. So without further ado, let's get right into this. I'm just gonna go over onto my website, click on the portal and region guide, and then just use the table of contents. If you get like a specific one, it's sorted by the region and then the portal. But we're just gonna start from the top with Bandle City. We're gonna do Bandle Cafeteria. So gain a free spatula on stage 2-1. Each round, champions equipped with spatulas feed portal snacks to their closest ally and grant them 20 permanent health for each spatula component that they have. So obviously, since this is permanent health that we're talking about here, it's best to use it on a unit that you're gonna keep the whole game. So what immediately jumps to my mind is going to be reroll comps, where you use those units at the start of the game and for the rest of the game. However, another way to do this is if you get an early 3-cost unit and you plan to use that unit throughout the game by just using their synergy, you could also put the spatula onto them and start stacking. But this should give you like massive amounts of HP, and you don't always have to abuse it. One thing that I will note that I forgot to in the intro is that even though we'll be recommending a lot of strategies for the 30 regions, just because something is recommended doesn't mean regular TFT doesn't work, you know? Like, of course, to get first place in most TFT games, you have to have everything working for you, but you don't always start off with like double aces or anything like that, right? So you gotta do what you gotta do. Sometimes you can abuse the HP stacking, sometimes you can't, but otherwise just put it on any carrier or tank that you could get going right away. So the earlier you do it, the better, and obviously the legends that give you spatulas probably gonna be a little bit better on this one, and same with every augment that gives that. But onto the next one, we have Scuttle Puddle. PvE monsters are replaced by scuttle crabs that grant extra loot. So for this portal, you want to be either super greedy or super aggressive because you are going to get a lot more loot. So you could either Giga Loot Streak, in which case you have zillions of gold save up, and then you just roll it down, stabilize in the mid or mid to late game. The other way to do it is to use all the extra items that you get and just slam every item and just hopefully win streak everything. So you want to do like one or the other if you can help it. Another tip I have for Scuttle Puddle is in the start of the game in stage 1, your units will be able to kill all the scuttles. So sell everything on your bench except for one unit so you could get extra interest if you're doing the super greedy playstyle. Some of you all may have seen that on my stream at twitch.tv/bunnymuffinslol, where we got this portal 2 games in a row. And the first game, we kind of figured out the mechanic, and then the second game, we got like 20 gold of interest in like the second round or something like that. So at the beginning of the game, look to see if you have upgrades or good items to slam, and then decide whether you want to go Giga Lose Streak or Giga Win Streak. Obviously, in every game of TFT, you still try to win or lose streak, but take it to like a whole nother level this time. On to the next one, we have Yordle Pordles. So twice per stage, get a free high tier champion. The champion tier increases with game time. So the way you want to play this is you can use the units to get to interest thresholds. So you could sell them and just use it as like more econ, so you could get to 10, 20, 30 gold a little bit faster, or you can use them to just play around. So you know how you get those random like 3-cost units early in the game sometimes off the loot orbs? You could kind of treat this sort of like that. Sometimes you just get a random higher cost unit at the start of the game, and you could just start like forcing that comp if you want. For example, Jayce when playing Gunners. And there are a lot of times where you play around whatever 4 costs that you get. There is a luck component, but obviously like flex play works a lot better on this portal compared to just hard forcing a certain champion. So onto the next build, we have Yuumi Zoom Zone. Player combats last 20 seconds instead of 30 seconds before overtime starts. So a lot of the faster comps are like a little bit better because they get into overtime a little bit quicker. But in this portal, frontline is very important as well because your backliners will pretty much always do damage, because once overtime hits, they'll be like zapping everything. So you just need to make sure that you can get to that point and keep as many of your damage units alive as possible, because the more units that are alive by the time this hits, the better you're going to be. So make sure that you have like decently strong tanks over getting like 3 different damage dealers. Now we're going to move regions and go to Demacia. By the way, what are your favorite regions lore-wise? But it's not that important, but it's just kind of fun to know, you know, because there's a lot of like Riot IP that I find pretty interesting. Demacia being one of the main like houses or something. So House Lightshield, gain a Crown of Demacia on stage 2-1. If the holder dies, you instantly lose the fight. And then Crown of Demacia, it says that like if you begin combat in the first 2 rows, you regen 1 to 7 max HP per second. And if you start in the back 2 rows, you get 1 to 7% attack damage and ability power every second instead. And then if the wearer dies, you instantly lose the fight. So first tip is you can remove the item by benching the wearer if you want to like swap it. It's in the description, but some people don't know that. So you probably always want to put the crown on your backline unit because there isn't really good backline access in this game right now, or in this set. Yeah, just put it on like whoever you have in the back. It's a pretty good item to have because it gives like a lot of stats. But you could also wait for the fight to start before deciding who to put it on. The only bad part is if you take too long, you lose this like start a combat bonus. So make sure that you actually are very quick about it. Next portal we have is the Petricite Forest. All units are larger and have 150 bonus health. So like bruisers benefit a lot from this. Any comp that benefits, or any champion that benefits from having more health, they're going to be even better on this map. So like obviously bruisers come to mind, and then stacking items probably are going to be a tiny bit better because the fights are just going to last longer. So items such as Gwynsu's Rage Blade or Archangel Staff are going to be like slightly more value. Nothing insane value though, but it's just slightly more. So if you're ever deciding like, do I build Rabadon's Death Cap or Archangels? And like most games, you're like back and forth between the two on a certain champion. Well, probably lean more towards the Archangels on this portal. So that's what I mean by like having the portals kind of guide you in your play, but don't dictate your play. Win streaking is also a little bit better, but we can't always control when we win streak. The reason why lose streaking is more punishing is because oftentimes more units are alive because the fights snowball a little faster, and since they have more health, you don't get those like lucky kills a lot of times. But it's not like that much different. On to the next region, we have Freljord. So Hearth-Home is going to be the first one. On stage 4-5, gain a Masterwork upgrade consumable that lets you upgrade one equipped item into its Radiant version. And to play this one, you just kind of play normal, and then you just upgrade your main carry's items. There isn't really that much you can kind of change because there's no synergy like Mech, for example, where you combine 3 units into one. Those would typically be very good on one of these portals, but we don't have that in this set. So instead, you pretty much just play normal, but you should probably stat check which Radiant items are doing the best on that patch before you transform. On to the next one, we have Ornn's Forge. So randomly gain on either 2-5 or 3-5 an Ornn item anvil. And then the way to play this is to make sure not to complete 3 tank or carry items to allow for space for Ornn's item. And the reason why you want to do this is because Ornn items are just like much more powerful than regular items. So if there are 3 items on one carry versus 2 items and 1 Ornn item on another, the one with the Ornn item is going to be a little bit stronger, right? So always try to like spread out your items. So if you start the game and you have like bow, rod, and sword or something like that, and you build like a Gwynsu's Rage Blade, and you're like, hey, I'm gonna have this sword for my other character, right? You might not want to complete the sword item on the first carousel. The reason why is because then you have 2 damage items. If you get any more damage items, you'll have like full items on your carry of just regular items. Instead, what you should do is maybe go for a defensive item or a utility item on that first carousel, just to kind of spread the love a bit. And then once you get the Ornn item, try to get an Ornn item that like fits whatever your team needs by the time you get it. So that's one way you could play it. And also like another thing you could do is slam a little bit more aggressively for early game items, because you likely will just get a best in slot Ornn item later on. So if you just slam earlier, you don't get as punished for building like suboptimal items to build a win streak or something like that. But let's move on into Ionia. God-Willow's Grove. A spot on your bench becomes the Grove, and the champion's place in it contributes their non-unique traits as if they were in your army. So you want to treat this like a +1 unit type of map. So kind of like having a tactician's crown, you just put a crappy unit there. Let's be real, guys. The unit that you have that's just a trait bot when everyone starts a game with a force of nature, it's not really changing any outcome of any fight. So this kind of like simulates that. So obviously the way to like giga maximize this is to use units with 3 traits. For example, Teemo is a strategist, multicaster, and a Yordle, and that gives a lot more slots than just 2 slots, right? So you could kind of play around with that, but again, if you don't have a game to actually put Teemo on that bench slot, it's not going to be that worth it, right? So you definitely want to just play regular TFT and pretend you have like a +1 champion slot instead. So a lot of the comps that will do well in this are those that really want to reach like the high vertical synergies also, because it's much easier to get to like a 9 synergy because you have that extra slot on your bench too. The next one up we have is Placidium Library. Gain a scroll of knowledge on stage 3-5. Use it on a champion to open an armory offering every emblem that matches their trait. Pretty similar to the last one, but this one is going to be an item that you have to put on someone. So the whole thing of being able to reach like high vertical synergies is actually not easier, because you can't reach 9 without actually getting to level 9 because you have to put the item on someone. But you could reach 8 synergies pretty easily. So stuff like Void is going to be pretty good there. But this portal pretty much forces you to narrow your options on stage 3-5 for what you want to play in the late game. So try to commit like a little bit earlier, or like be prepared to commit on stage 3-5 whenever you're on this region. And also have some sort of a plan to use this scroll. So what you can can do is like data check which emblems are doing the best and kind of lean more into those comps. So just go to any data site and then kind of type those in. So next up we have is the Dreaming Pool. At the start of each stage, gain a champion that fits your team. And the way to play this portal is, especially in the late game, when you're missing 1 or 2 copies for like a 2-star unit you really want, or a special 5 cost that completes your team, you can kind of just get that champion sometimes. So I pretty much like always get the champion I really want for some reason, even if I have like multiple traits running. So I haven't seen that many games where I'm like getting screwed by this. So if you're like really gunning for Zeri or something like that, you will get the Zeri. At least I have been. Like maybe I'm just getting lucky because whenever I get this map, I get the exact 4 costs I want. It's something to kind of plan around because you could say like, hey, on stage 4-1, I don't have to really roll all the way down to 0 on level 7. Instead, I'm going to plan for a fast 8 because I do get the copy of the unit I want. And then maybe I'll guarantee the 2-star at level 8 later on. So you can kind of use those little like decision-making points to kind of plan around your team. The only con of like doing what I said is that you have to have like a board that kind of supports that type of luck. So you need to be playing both Zon and Gunners. By that point, you can't really like just have random crap out there and then like get it anyways. But oftentimes in the early game, you sometimes just sell that unit because you're playing a bunch of random stuff. But if you're like just hard forcing, this portal is pretty decent because you could just keep every unit that it gives you. And next up we have is Nox's Immortal Bastion. On stage 2-1, gain a placeable battle flag that grants 20% attack speed and 20% max health shield to units that start combat adjacent to it. I'll be honest, I have not played this one yet because no one ever stands on this one. So yeah, it is what it is. The typical way to play this though is to put the flag near your backline corner so that your tanks can stay in the front without the flag buff, while your carries and other units can surround the flag. This way your positioning isn't griefed and the enemy can't close in on your backline that easily. Now you might be wondering, what the hell am I talking about? So let's say you're playing the game and you want the flag to hit both your main tanks. So our main tank might be like Sejuani, let's say, and our main carry might be Aphelios. If you position this way, sometimes the enemy carries can sort of walk in this way instead of being aggro to your main tank. So sometimes you could just sacrifice the flag buff, go into a corner maybe over here or something like that. And then this way, when their carries are even on the side, they aggro onto your tanks instead of onto your backline. Like maybe you have the Taric there or something like that. Sometimes if you just like go and group everyone all in one thing, their carries that are starting over here can just walk all the way to your backline and just like destroy your whole team. So you have to be careful when like using this. You might have to sack the buff on some people. Another good thing to do on this region is build Shroud of Stillness because you get a free Shroud pretty much every time. On to the next one, we have Noxkraya. Each time you take an augment, a random arena hex appears. Champions on an arena hex gain an item that they can use. So if you have like a comp with multiple carries, this is very, very powerful. But if the hex is in the back 2 rows, obviously like put your carries there. If it's in the front 2 rows, put your bruisers there. But comps that use multiple carries really shine on this type of map. So if you are playing like the Shurima comp, for example, like who are the Shurimas? Like Nasus, Azir, Akshan, Cassante. Like you have 4 different item holders to kind of use all these hexes. It's like really useful in those types of comps. Whereas other comps where it's just like 1 main tank, 1 main carry, not going to do as well. Now let's move on into Piltover though. Jayce's workshops. All augments offered this game will be prismatic. So the way to play this is to play really hard into win streaking because prismatic lobbies are like really fast. Games can just end really quickly because people get really powerful and then like instead of winning a fight like 2-0, you maybe win the fight like 5-0, and same for when you lose because the game's a little bit more snowbally. But all in all, like you just have to play like a little bit faster and keep in mind that other people will hit because in prismatic games, like some of them, the econ ones, they like pretty much always let you hit. So if you're playing like regular and you're looking at your board and you're like, hey, this is pretty stable normally for like stage 4-1 or something like that, most of the times you're not. So always like be a little more like liberal in your use of money because it's better to be like safe than sorry because prismatic games, like people get stronger a lot faster. The next build up we have is Stillwater Hold. You don't really have to do that much on here, just play normal TFT as if it was before augments. I went over this a little bit in my like how to play TFT video, so I'll leave a link to that over here if you want to check that out. Next one we have is the University. So this one is the first augment will be a prismatic, very similar to Jayce's workshop. You pretty much use the same thing, and probably like while data checking is still a thing, just look up the best prismatics. I will be updating this in my like augment guide that I do once a patch. Some prismatics are just like super broken just because they like balancing issues or whatever. Like March of Progress is like super broken right now, so you just kind of have to know which ones are good. So you could either data check or just look at my augment guide. Either is probably fine there. Oh, and also people might be wondering like, how do you know which prismatic comes out next? There's essentially an augment tree, and the university replaces all of the first augment choices, and then you just go into regular probability. So this is kind of what the tree looks like if you're kind of curious about that. But next one up we have is Shadow Isles, Thresh's Sanctum. Oh, by the way, the reason why they're like regions and portals is because Ryze's ability changes based on what region you're in. Ryze is pretty much always good though in the late game, so I don't really pay too much attention to that, but you kind of have to know, like, for example, one of them gives an attack speed buff when you play Ryze, and obviously comps that actually use attack speed will be a lot better on it. So if you're playing like Sorcerers, for example, probably not the best time to use Ryze, but he's still like pretty decent. But Thresh's Sanctum, when any unit dies, collect their soul. Every 40 souls gain a loot orb. So if you want to get a lot of value out of this portal, you want to like just be just strong enough to like compete with your enemies. So like scouting becomes super important here if you want to like giga optimize it. It's probably like a pretty big wasted time because you have to like think of so many things. And if you're like super optimizing, obviously do it. But most people, if you're like a human being, you'll often make yourself like way too dizzy. But the theory is if you are like equal strength to everyone else, you'll win or lose by 1 unit. And because of that, you get as many stacks as possible. And I do see some scenarios in the late game where like I or my opponent have like 1 or 2 more loot orbs than other players, or like the player that you're facing. And it's because like over like the long course of the game, the differences kind of add up. But overall, if you just do like a normal win or lose streak where you like 3-0 people, get 0-3 to 0-4 to 0-5 or whatever, it's not the end of the world because you still get lots of econ gold from like streaks. But overall, it's like a little less punishing to the people who like win, lose, as long as they're like medium strength. But it's like really hard to judge because people, you have to keep track of like 7 players, right? It's kind of difficult to do. But onto the next one we have is Yorick's Graveyard. Every time a player dies, all players open an armory containing 4 of the eliminated player's items. The way to play this portal is just slam all your items in the early game, because as long as you survive, you will get items from other people, so you could get like best in slots later on anyways. Maybe not best in slots, but like very good in slots, but you can't get them if you die, you know? So play very aggressively, slam all your items, and that's pretty much like the way to play this one. Let's move on into Shurima Shifting Sands. If you don't have a magnetic remover on your bench at the start of the game, get one. This one's a pretty cringe portal because you just build Shroud of Stillness or Zephyr and then just like swap it off every turn. But you could also put items on item holders that you want to keep throughout the game. So for example, if you're playing Deadeye, Akshan is an incredibly good item holder for Aphelios, but a lot of times people don't use Akshan as an item holder because they don't want to sell him and then buy another Akshan and then swap the items over onto Aphelios. But on this one, you could just throw the items onto your Akshan and not worry about that because you get an item remover every single turn. But obviously, like, Shroud is another way to kind of abuse this. Next up we have is Shuriman Bazaar. Each champion on a component carousel has 2 components instead of 1, so it's kind of like the glitched out carousels that we saw before. So you have 2 approaches, like obviously go even more aggressive than you normally do, or go even more econ heavy because you want to just get first pick every round, because sometimes you just get like super best in slots really early. So you could kind of like grief your early game just to kind of get those guaranteed good components. Both styles work, you just have to lean more into one or the other. Next up we have is Warlord's Palace. Stage 4-7 is replaced by a treasury armory round, and each reroll costs 2. So in this one, you play similar to how we did in set 7, I believe, where you just build a lot of items because you get your best items in the late game anyways. So just play a little more aggressively. Now we move into Targon, Marus Omegnum. Sounds like a Ligma joke or something like that. But on stage 2, 5, and 4, 5, gain a Tactician's Crown. And with that in mind, the games are also going to be a lot faster because people are going to lose a lot more HP. So playing aggressively and playing for win streak like really help here, because people are going to be dying really early because there are just extra units to deal more damage. One way to do that is to kind of go into vertical synergy traits, because a lot of times those units are pretty cheap. For example, if you're running like 8 sorcerers or something like that, you can play like Orianna and Malzahar. Both of those are 1-cost units, and you could get like a kind of semi-strong board without investing too much money, which is kind of nice in these types of builds because they allow it, because you have a lot of extra units. Ideally, both of those units would be like a 2-star Cassante and a 2-star Ari or something like that, but you don't always get that, and it's really expensive to do that. So you kind of use those like filler units just to kind of be more gold efficient in the mid game. But overall, like, just play more aggressively whenever you're on this one. Targon Prime, when you reach 40 health, receive a blessing from the Targonian gods. So reroll comps are pretty good on this map because you get to 40 health pretty quickly. Sometimes I start stage 4-1 with like 30 health, and that's when you spike. So you just like giga spike at that point. Hopefully you have like 3-star Tristana, 3-star Poppy or whatever, or whatever reroll you're doing, and then just use the blessing that you get to either fill your econ back up or just get like a bunch of cool items. So you pretty much spike at like a very opportune time, and then you start like a pretty good win streak after that. That's one way to do it. You don't always have to play this way, but like reaching 40 health safely is obviously the goal of this map. The summit's the next one. Starting at stage 3, gain a lesser champion duplicator at the start of each stage, and then on stage 5 and beyond, gain a champion duplicator instead. So obviously like rerolling is really effective in this one, but you could also use it to kind of fast 8 instead, because you could kind of just find all your 2-star 3 costs in the mid game and then use the bigger duplicators on stuff like 4 costs and 5 costs, or you could just 3 cost reroll and just get like a ton of copies of them. You kind of have to sack a little bit because you won't be using your duplicators as early as other players who are playing standard, but it is one viable strategy to kind of use on this map. But overall, I think like rerolls are pretty good, and also like just using the duplicators early and just using them to kind of stabilize. We'll move into the Void now, the Lavender Sea. Starting on stage 2-1, a Void symbiote infects a board hex, and after every carousel round and PvE round, it moves randomly. This hex grants 20% damage reduction if it's in the first 2 rows and 20% damage increase if it's in the back 2 rows. Obviously, you want to put your main tank or main carry there, but what happens if it's kind of in the middle? A lot of people, they put their carry there and then they get CC'd by like all the AoEs that are kind of in like every set, right? Like if you put a unit in the center, it's more likely to get hit by AoE. So don't get baited by those. If it's in like the back corners, obviously like put your primary carry there. And if it's in the front row, obviously put your main tank there. But if it's ever kind of in between, try to put like one of your like secondary units there, someone that you want to buff up a little bit but don't care about that much, because if you put your main guy there, sometimes they just die randomly to a lot of like AoE spells or get targeted much earlier than they normally do. But next one up we have is the Rupture. This one, travel to a random location that is not currently shown, so just look at any of the other ones. Unstable Rift, gain an unstable completed item that pops off and transforms into a random item every round. This one I really like. I think this one you want to just build 2 items for everyone and then just kind of use that random item as like a flex item. So it's really good if you play a comp that uses all sorts of items like AP, AD, and tank items, or be a comp that can be able to reach legendary units, because legendary units can kind of use everything. But if you're going like pure sorcerers, for example, might not be the best idea because they can't use the attack damage items, you know? Kind of play more of like a balanced comp when you are on Unstable Rift. Now we move on into Zon. In Ecliptic Vaults, every time you select an augment, gain 4 gold per augment you have. So this one, you want to just use the gold that you get to build more interest and invest more in late game. But it also means that gold is not as important in this game because you always get it back later on. So if you ever need to like roll down to 30 or something like that from 50, that's perfectly fine because you generally get the gold back. And then like, let's say on stage 4-2 or something, you literally get like 12 extra gold. So reaching like level 8, level 7 is a lot easier if you're doing like a pure econ strategy. But if you roll down a little bit earlier, you don't get like too far behind compared to everyone else, because you can only get 5 interest per round, right? Unless you have hedge fund or rich get richer. So that means that people who like save up all their gold and have like 80 gold, let's say, from like saving up all the gold that they, extra gold that they get and like making interest on it, there's a cap, right? So don't be afraid to like spend your gold early, because it's much easier to catch up in econ later on, so you don't actually lose that much interest. Next one up we have is Glasc Industries. Every time you build a completed item, gain 3 gold. So obviously like slamming items is pretty good, right? But another thing is when you're picking augments, pick augments that give you more item components so that you could kind of combine them and get even more gold, because pretty much all those augments gain a ton of value whenever you're on Glasc Industries, but obviously just slam everything as well. Last one is the Sump. There's no interest this game. Instead, starting on stage 2-1, gain 3 gold every round. So since there's no interest, you should look to push levels, play aggressively, and win streak, because that's typically how people have been using the augment called Hustler. And also avoid all the augments that give you interest gold, because stuff like hedge fund just doesn't work here. But if they give you regular gold, then obviously that's really good because it's harder to kind of get that. So all augments that give XP and like flat gold are going to be better on the Sump. But this guide will be available on my website, bunnymuffins.lol, and I'll probably put it in like this guide section over here. But overall, like hopefully this helps you understand what to do on each and every portal. It's obviously going to be kind of helping guide you, but not like fully making every decision for you, because obviously you can only use what's given to you in each and every game. You can't just like force specific comps, because sometimes it gives you complete garbage. But at the end of the day, just playing good TFT is going to help you the most. As long as you have a general understanding about what's changing on each and every one of these portals, you'll probably be fine. But if you do have any questions, do leave them in the comments below or join the Discord. I'll leave a link in the description below. But apart from that, that's going to be it for me today. Hopefully, I'll see you all next video.